Thank you, Mr. Lamoureux. We'll go to our 4-minute round, starting with Mr. Reid. Mr. Reid, 4 minutes.
Thank you. Just to make it clear, those comments that Mr. Lamoureux was offering were given by Laurie Hahn, Member of Parliament, who's just sitting down the table and who will be a witness before us on Thursday. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for giving me this time, and Mr. Kingsley, thank you for being here again. It's a real pleasure. I wanted to concentrate on some comments you made today regarding vouching in 2 locations. You talked about on reserve and then in restricted access institutions. So I'll start with your comments regarding reserves. You say vouching occurs on reserves which are defined territorially and where the person being vouched for already possesses a status Indian card, acceptable proof under the Canada Elections Act. Each reserve usually constitutes a poll or more than one poll, and consequently the possession of a card should constitute sufficient proof of address. Under the current law it does not, hence the need for the vouching process. So that could be seen as an argument, as presented here, for vouching. It could also be seen, I would submit, and I'm looking for your feedback on what I'm about to submit, as an argument in favor of extending the purpose and use of the status Indian card. It has a special status under the law. I remember being on the committee when we actually negotiated over this point, and one of the members of the committee, Karen Redmond, who's no longer a member of Parliament, suggested that the status Indian card be given a special spot, which it is under Section 143, subsection 2.2 of the current law. Changing that status a bit so as to allow the status Indian card to also serve as a proof of residence. If that were done, would that resolve the issue that you drew attention to here?
In that particular context, yes, it would.
Okay. Let me turn then to the question of institutional residences. One of the problems that I think occurred, we saw this in Etobicoke Centre, was that the current vouching system actually does not provide. I mean, getting rid of vouching will have no influence on people who are in areas serviced by mobile polls. We're talking about, in this case, seniors who no longer have driver's licenses and many other forms of ID, but nobody doubts that they are who they say they are. They are in an institution to which access is limited. That would be true in other residential institutional settings as well, such as correctional facilities. In such a situation, I wonder if the solution is not to design a special system. I'm not sure if it's vouching or something else, but that simply is not drawing upon the current system, because you aren't going to find other people living in the same poll who can provide a vouching service. Perhaps it's to require institutions to compel them to provide information to Elections Canada as one possibility. Perhaps it's to allow vouching by someone who's a spouse of that individual. But the point is to say it's a specific problem that requires a specific solution, that it's not part of the broader problem of voter ID elsewhere. Can I ask for your thoughts on that?
Well, if one is able to design a system whereby these people are entitled to vote simply because they are there and they've been enumerated or revised onto the list during the very election, if one can devise such a system, then that handles that part of the matter.
Right. As part, for example, as part of the duties of a returning officer for the riding, they could be required to enumerate mobile polls first, and the institutions could be required, perhaps they are not, to submit information promptly.
It would help if the institution were to be compelled. I know that some of them are hesitant, too busy, whatever the reason. There's always a good reason for not doing the right thing in the minds of some people. But you know, they are part of the targeted revision. All the mobile poll areas, all of those institutions are targeted for targeted revision during the election period. This is why it is such, to me, an issue which I cannot understand, why we doubt these people.
Right. Thank you. We'll go to 4-minute round with Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is something maybe we'll come back and talk to Mr. Reid about his example of the polling, mobile polls. I've never fully understood, because the Act says you have to vouch for somebody, you have to be an elector in the same polling division, which is a different thing from a mobile poll on election day. So if there is a gap on vouching in that context, we definitely have to deal with it. I'm not sure there is, but if there is. Thank you again. I wanted to come back to just a couple of things. The whole question of the exemption on fundraising during an election campaign, you've indicated it's not justified, and then, quote, "It's simply not possible to seek funds without including reasons for giving, and this can only constitute advertising for or against a party or a candidate," unquote, and you've given other reasons. So Mr. Mayron also said it's, from his point of view, unmonitorable. The whole exemption has been put in there in a way that he won't actually even know who's actually being contacted in a way that in any effective way can be monitored. I'm not sure if you heard or read that part of his testimony, and if so, do you think he's accurate on that?
Well, obviously, if a document is not available, is not reported on, then one cannot verify it, one cannot audit it. It is not part of what is to be, because this is what the bill proposes at this time, that this be excluded and not reported on. Not only excluded, but not reported on. And already we see the problem with party returns. This is an issue that is before you, and I hope you will solve it this time. It's been with you since the 38th general election.
Great. Thank you. I wanted to also return, I was very glad that you pointed out the analog to problems with vouching, the irregularities that the Neufeld report audit revealed, and you essentially said, don't get rid of the methods of identification like vouching, but make it the E-Day process much better. One of the features of that is more timely recruiting and training of election day workers. Mr. Mayron has now unequivocally said he thinks that the time has come for parties to get out of the business of being part of staffing up election day workers, to give Elections Canada more time to recruit in advance and to train much further in advance. Plus, he acknowledges training has to improve. Do you have any comments on that issue of making sure not only there are more officers, that was your point, on election day, but that training improves so that the kinds of irregularities that have been used by the minister as his Trojan horse don't happen again?
Well, obviously under the bill there's an additional week that the Chief Electoral Officer shall have at his disposal in order to start recruitment. In other words, candidates will have, or the first and the second party at the previous election, will have 1 week less to nominate people. I think it has to be recognized by Canadians. We're now at the stage where only 30% of those positions are filled by the nominees that you provide. Exactly. Only 30%. 10% in the Western provinces. You have to wait. So it has become almost an anachronism. And when I was Chief Electoral Officer, I was just waiting for that to die on the vine, frankly. And if you don't do it this time, you'll do it at the next time that you look at the bill in a couple of years. You'll be doing it because it will not affect you in any way, shape, or form. Thank you.
And one last question, quick answer. I understand that at best moving the Commissioner for Canada Elections to the DPP's office is neutral. There was no actual, there's no actual gain from your perspective. Is that true?
There is no gain, and it is a perpetuation of the unfortunate decision that was made in 2006, which really was not the issue that was debated at all at your predecessor committee here at all, even though I've reported on it. So to me, it's ball game over on that one, and the change is really not affecting anything except cost effectiveness and the timeliness of prosecutions. In other words, the time it takes between the investigation and the laying of charges. This is an issue that has not been addressed by this committee at any time, and I suggest that you should do that. The Director of Public Prosecutions is a public official. He should come here and answer to you about how he has handled this responsibility in the meantime.
Thank you. Mr. Reid, 4 minutes to finish us off with this round, please.
Thank you very much. Before going direct to Mr. Kingsley, I just want to respond to something that Craig Scott said regarding the current commissioners, or rather not commissioners, but Chief Electoral Officer's suggestion that parties should get out of getting election day officers out there. I have to say I disagree with that suggestion. I want to say why. The DRO and the poll clerk at each poll are appointed by the first and second parties in that riding in the last election, and their job traditionally was to be the first line of defense against fraud by the other party. They essentially canceled each other out. It is difficult to find people for those positions, I grant that, and getting harder as time goes on. but they do serve as a useful check, and in ridings where there is reason to be afraid that someone might want to resort to monkey business, they serve as a very effective protection. So I would just say, I think that's important to keep. And I say this as someone who I initiated the measure that caused the returning officers for ridings to no longer be a partisan appointment, to become an appointment made by the chief electoral officer. So as someone who tried to get parties out of that role, I think that getting them out of the DRO role and and poll clerk role would be a bad idea. Going back to the vouching issue, Mr. Kingsley, I just wanted to ask you about, in your comments, you also made a suggestion relating to how vouching would be done. You made the following suggestion, which I'll quote. I'm going to ask you to expand on it if you could. You said, amending the vouching provisions to require that the requisite oath also be given in writing, right now I gather it's verbally, will address concerns that have been raised respecting vouching, end quote. Could I ask you to expand upon what you're getting at, and also about some of the practicalities involved in asking people to fill out a written oath, presumably on site with a busy election official?
Well, in point of fact, I'm trying to address the perception that has been brought forth, which is, in my view, nothing but a perception that there are problems with vouching, by utilizing other sections of the bill where the bill says, in these cases, personation, someone voted in my place, the bill says you will now have to sign that oath as opposed to only taking it orally. I'm saying, okay, if that's what you want to do, if that solves that particular problem, then it must obviously be able to solve the particular problem of the perception that some people have about the vouching system. And I will add that with respect to the returning officers, there's been comments made that we appointed which were predominantly Liberals. That was an excellent move on your part, sir, and I thank you on behalf of Canadians with the appointment of returning officers. But just so everyone knows, we were obligated by that law to seek the advice of every party leader about every returning officer, and any party leader that objected to any returning officer was off the list. I did not care who objected. We did not overturn any political leader. So the people who were left as returning officers, 180, were all people that had been accepted by all the parties.
Right. Right. I don't have time to ask another question, but seeing as we're going back and dealing with that bit of the historical record, I'll just say that in my own constituency of Lanark, Frontenac, Lennox, and Addington, the former Liberal-appointed returning officer, Caroline McMillan, was reappointed, and that was a reasonable, in this one case, I can say for sure that was a reasonable decision. She performed and has performed very professionally since that time. So I concur that in that one example, which is the only one I can turn to, it was a wise decision on your part.
Well, I returned to 307 others. All the leaders had the option, through all the people sitting in the House, to say no to any returning officer. And I just accepted that. I did not question it. If one leader said no, that returning officer was replaced. Okay.
Thank you. And I think we'll end it there. We can't start another line, so we'll stop there. Mr. Kingsley, it's always fantastic when you come to committee, and we learn a lot when you do. We hope to see you again in the future. We know we will. This committee gets to invite you on all elections matters, so we thank you. We will suspend for 2 minutes while we change witnesses and start our second half hour.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Appreciated this.
I'll go ahead and call the second half of our meeting back to order. We still are in public and televised, and we have two distinguished guests with us for this hour of our study. David Brock is the Chief Electoral Officer of the Northwest Territories, and Keith Archer, the Chief Electoral Officer from British Columbia. And have you arm wrestled to see who's going first?